Well, we gathered today to share in the collective history of the Iowa Debate Program and to celebrate Dr. David Hinksman's achievements as the Director of Debate at the University of Iowa. The significance of debate on campus cannot be overstated. Debate was the first student program formed, dating back all the way to 1860. Since that time, debate at Iowa has experienced a number of changes, from holding debates by candlelight in the old Capitol to competing virtually. From traveling by trains, then by automobiles, then by planes, and now by fiber optics. From well-crafted oratories to index cards, to card boxes, to tubs full of evidence, and now we're paperless. Debate has evolved and transformed to reflect the current paradigm of competitive argumentation. Iowa Debate oftentimes found itself as the leader and instigator of some of these changes. For example, Dr. Baird led the charge in breaking down gender barriers by taking 4 women to an all-male tournament. They each went on to become victorious. Dr. Baird later was to be the lead consultant on the design of the national organization to become known as the NDT. Dale Herbeck and John Katsoulis introduced the concept of permutations to challenge the relevancy of arguments in debate. Today, 95% of debates in high school and college are influenced by their theory. Dr. Rich Edwards changed debate forever. His tab room program revolutionized the administration and hosting of tournaments. It created the foundation for virtual debate by creating the coding model that drives online debating today. This is but a small sampling of the accomplishments of the leadership of Iowa Debate. Today, we're going to capture some of the memories and experiences. Listening to the voices of alumni is critical to preserve the institutional memory of a program, a memory that influenced the evolution of the program and helps it to identify its mission and value it brings to campus. Maybe throughout this process, we might just discover where Dr. Dave fits in amongst the pantheon of debate legends and giants that made up the history of Iowa Debate. Names like Baird, Hancher, Becker, Hitchcock, Grombeck, Kemp, Koch, Herbeck, Katsoulis, and Slappy. Those are pretty impressive names. They mean a lot to our community. Well, this is how the night will unfold. First, we'll have a set of speakers. Some will add to your understanding of the history of Iowa. Others will share comments about Dr. Dave. Once the speakers have concluded, we will open the program up to the audience. We will ask that all comments are kept to 3 minutes in length. I might have to mute some of you. To get recognized to speak, please type in the chat window if you'd like to share a story. I'll then place you in the queue. When it's your turn to speak, I'll invite you to talk by calling on your name. There will be a formal in-person event next November, so we will limit the number of speakers tonight and invite everyone to attend the November 5th and 6th event next year, celebrating Dave's retirement. Before I introduce the first speaker, I have the first story. It's kind of the privilege of being host. So many years ago, one of the traditions that existed in Iowa Debate was we would celebrate the end of the first semester by exchanging gifts that were oftentimes just gag gifts, right? And during the time, one time, a very timid student walked up to Dr. Dave, because it was always kind of the tradition of the debaters to get Dr. Dave something special. Although we would share joke gifts and gag gifts with each other, all right? Dr. Dave's was always very serious. And so this very timid student walked up to Dave and he said, "Dave, we really thought hard about what to get you this year. I mean, what do you get a guy that has everything? You have good looks, intelligence, you have a wonderful personality." And we really thought to ourselves, What is it that you're missing? And then we all came to the conclusion that you have one overwhelming flaw. There's a gap in that which is perfect. So Dave just kind of looked at him and said, okay. He took the package, he opened it up, and inside was a Garmin GPS. Because if any of you have ever traveled with Dave, you know that he is directionally impaired. So that is one of my favorite stories and memories I have of Dave, is the fact that the students also recognize, in fact, students would flip coins and Rochambeau to find out who didn't have to drive with Dave. That's the truth. They like driving with the graduate students instead, I guess. Well, that's enough of my story. So the first person I would like to introduce tonight in our lineup, and I will show you a quick brief example of the lineup here. Will be Beth Ingram. Now, Beth debated for Iowa back in the 70s. And when debate had lost kind of its support from the Division of Continuing Ed, I needed to find a new place, a new home for debate, because that's just sometimes something that happens right on campus. Somebody takes over and they really have priorities are in a different direction, right? And I just happened to stumble on, in fact, I didn't even stumble, a man named Doug Lee, who used to carry our water through in Division of Continuing Ed, kind of introduced Beth and I together, and she gave me the position as the director of youth programs here on campus, which then enabled me to pick the debate program up and move it into the office of the provost. Well, to make a long story short, we used to talk about the house that Slappy built. Remember, Slappy took Iowa debate from a broom closet, right, and a few filing cabinets to the 5,000 square foot that we used to have as an office at the International Center. Well, Beth one-upped him. She put us on top of the Seashore Hall, which was a nice penthouse, which was literally $1 million view here in Iowa City. Like if you were to get that space in a Moen building, right? That's a minimum $1 million condo, right? And so she gave us the penthouse, and not only did she give it to us, she furnished it for us and updated all of our computer equipment. So when we talk about Beth, we talk about her in the highest regard and with the greatest praise. And she didn't always have the best experience necessarily in the past with Iowa debate. And we recognized that, and she wanted to make sure that it wasn't repeated with the students that now are currently part of the program. She understood our devotion commitment to them. And it's because of her that we are what we are now today. She played a very large part of that. So Dr. Ingram, if you would like to speak, I give you the floor.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Paul. I'm here with my husband, Pat, who's also an Iowa debater from the 70s. And I think we should say hi to Steve, who was our coach at the time, and Rich Edwards, who wasn't there at the time, but I spent one weekend living in his house for a debate tournament a long time ago. So when I was thinking about what I might talk about, it feels like our time in debate was ancient history. And I was thinking, there are probably only 4 people on this call who know what a Mimeo machine is. Rich and Steve. So I thought maybe I'd just talk for a second about why I support debate. And what Paul didn't say is that I used to work at Iowa. In fact, I'm a fellow retiree from Iowa, although I'm still working over here at Northern Illinois. I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, and went to the University of Iowa as an undergraduate, and I didn't know a single soul when I got there. And I found the debate team, and the debate team became my family. And my friends were debaters. My husband was a debater, and debate gave me the connection to Iowa, and I found a home as an undergraduate. It didn't hurt that I was an economics major, and about half of the debaters were in economics and the other half were in political science. But my best memories of debate at that time were the trips that we took to Missouri and Tennessee, driving through the night, but also judging high school debate tournaments. And I was just talking to Pat and thinking, I think we got paid like $5 a round to do that. Now I think, geez, yeah, four or $5 a round to spend a weekend off helping the high school debaters in Iowa, but it was a lot of fun. So, and policy debate has opened up a lot of connections to other people, because you run into policy debaters a lot of times in academia, but in other places too. And it gives you it gives you a connection to other people. Both of our kids became policy debaters in high school. They didn't debate in college, but true to form, one of them's a lawyer and one of them is a graduate student in political science. So, it kind of continues down through the generations. Anyway, we support the team because the team supported us, and it gave us opportunities. It gave us a place to call home, a set of friends, and some skills that really helped both of us in our careers after we left the University of Iowa. So, my hope for you is that someday you'll find it that you're able and willing to support the team as well, and return the favor that the team made for you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. And Pat, you're going to have to speak next time.
Thank you,
He's
Beth.
just here as a support person.
All right. Our next person we'd like to have talk is Dr. Steve. I'm just going to call you because that's how we know each other. He's the professor of communication and director of debate at Capital University. He debated at the University of Iowa as an undergrad. Then he got his graduate degree here at the University of Iowa, and then he ended up being a coach. And since then, he's gone on to direct at Georgia as well, Steve. All right. And
I was an assistant. That was my first job.
That's right. So, and then now he would like, I think, to share with us kind of a little bit of his experience and what debate was like back in the 70s, especially from that perspective. So thank you, Steve, for volunteering and sharing your.
Glad to do that. I thought I'd try to tie in a little bit to that theme of physical facilities, among other things, and sort of talk about the lead up to Dr. Dave, who's done so much for the program. I have a quibble with the history that I read on the website, because in the fall of 1966, when I attended the first debate team meeting, Bob Kemp was our coach. The history says he didn't come till 67, but he was there in 66. Maybe the reason for the mistake is because he wasn't the director of forensics then. Dr. Gene Akins was director. And Gene left at the end of that year to actually become chair of a brand new program at a brand new school. He was the founding director of the Department of Communication at Wright State University, which was just being created. So Bob took over as director of forensics in 67, but he was coach in 66.
I'm taking notes.
At any rate, the fall of 66 was kind of interesting for a number of thematic reasons. There'd been an interregnum then. Dr. Baird had retired a decade earlier. The program had been run by graduate assistants. A full-time coach, they'd thought they'd gotten one, but he didn't want to coach debate. Doug Enninger, who had coached NDT finalists at Florida, but was done with coaching. They were left without a coach after they filled Dr. Baird's faculty position. In 1966, the commitment got made to actually hire a full-time coach. So I was just lucky. It was really a wild thing. I had debated in high school, and I had earned a gold key from the IFL, which Iowa Forensic League. They only give out a couple of those a year. I was kind of like Pippin, in Lord of the Rings, learning about pints, and saying, I'm getting one, and when I earned mine and I came as a freshman on campus, I went looking for Hugh Seabury, who was the director of IFL. And I tracked him down at the campus grill right across from Schaefer Hall. And sitting next to him was Bob Kemp. And when I told Seabury I was looking for my gold key, Kemp swung around and said, we have a debate team meeting tonight. You should come. So that was actually the origin of how I got involved in Iowa debate. I was a budding journalist. I wasn't going to be doing debate in college. but I showed up at that meeting. Quick, kind of statement about facilities. At the time, there actually was a forum room in the north end of Schaefer Hall, which was where the speech department was located. And Dr. Baird's office had not been cleaned out in 10 years. His office was in the northwest corner of Schaefer Hall. And our first meeting was in that forum room right across from his office. Walking in there, looking at the graduate students who were sitting on benches along the side of the wall. There was a guy by the name of Bruce Gronbeck. There was another guy by the name of Michael Calvin McGee. And then there were a few other folks, Dick Ranta, Walt Kirkpatrick. We had quite an array of college assistant coaches to work with. And it was a pretty exciting time, in a lot of ways. I ended up as a freshman helping clean out Dr. Baird's office. I wish I had saved some of those old posters of dual meets that Iowa had had. I remember a really elaborate one, a dual meet against the University of Hawaii, with all kinds of stuff attached to it. But anyway, our facilities at that point were what you could catch. The forum room and all of those facilities in Schaefer Hall went away when the department was moved to University Hall, later to be Jessup Hall the following year. So we lost sort of all of that classic stuff that was there. But what we did have was a debate house. And debate house was actually a 220 North Dubuque. It was half of a duplex, and McGee and Ranta and Kirkpatrick lived there. And they had space for some additional folks. When I was a senior, and then first year of grad school, I moved into that as well. And debaters met there all the time. It's pretty convenient. You just walked down the alley to the Hamburg Inn. A gas station next door at that time was a Skelly, was famous for having corn on the curb. So we would always say, to find the debate house, just look for the Skelly gas station with the corn in front. But, it wasn't the greatest facility in the world. It was comfortable, though, and we met there a lot and did a lot of work, and it was pretty exciting. When I started grad school, 1970, the one Dr. Baird story I actually have to tell is kind of exciting to me personally. But, Dr. Baird was sort of a spectral figure for undergraduates, I think, in that 1960s period. I mean, he was, hey, we're all very self-centered undergraduates. He was sort of this fellow who would come to tournaments and sit in the back and hardly ever said anything. He sort of, was around the edges of the program. So, didn't really know Dr. Baird at all, but first day of grad school, fall of 1970, I'm bounding up the stairs of Jessup Hall, pretty excited, to be an assistant coach at that point in time. And there's Dr. Baird edging his way down the stairs, both hands on the balustrade, carefully moving down. He was in his mid-80s at that point. I think you probably know he lived to 96? Authored a book at 95, I think. But anyway, I'm jumping up the stairs, he's edging down the stairs, and he looks at me. And I freeze, like I'd never been the center of his attention before. And I just sort of stopped on the stairs, and he looked up at me and he smiled and he said, "Steve," and I had no idea he knew who I was, let alone my name. "I am so glad you are joining us. And I can tell you to this day, I feel anointed." Sort of like, okay, debate is you are debate. That's where you're going to be. And I suppose that's why I'm still an active coach at 72. I've got Lincoln Douglas debaters going to St. Anselm's virtually tomorrow. So, still doing this stuff. Anyway, we didn't have a lot of facilities as graduate students in the 70s either, but we did do a lot of exciting things. And then when I did come back 79, 80 to replace Bob as a sabbatical replacement and also finish my dissertation, we did have the broom closet that you're referring to up on the top of University Hall. It was not much larger than a broom closet. So it was pretty exciting, when both, the work that Beth did later, and of course, Beth was debating then when I came back 79, 80, and then, what Dave did in delivering what we had hoped for when we started with a full-time coach in 66 to rebuild the program. all the debaters, everyone were excited about being on that pathway. And what Dave delivered is what we had all hoped for and what we were all building for. So yeah, this odyssey has been a long one, but in 2000, you know, when that NDT championship came along and yeah, we had that opportunity to celebrate that event, that was fantastic. And I think all Hawk debaters owe him a tremendous debt, not just from the time that he started, but from even before when we started trying to build this program back to be a real NDT contender. And it took a while and it took a lot of work. So yeah, 3 minutes isn't long. I thought I would give it my best shot.
Time.
Thanks, Steve.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Chock full of memories and a lot of history there. And thank you so much, Steve. I mean, only you could bring that. And so I really appreciate you volunteering. Our next speaker will be John Peters. And John retired from the University of Iowa, the Communication Studies Department. He's now currently a professor of English and Film Media Studies at Yale University. And John wanted to say a few words and share his story about Dave. So Dr. Peters.
Yep. Thank you, Paul. I'm thrilled to be here. This will be slightly different because it will be the colleague's point of view. Dave and I were colleagues from 1990 through 2016. And I have to say that I am totally thrilled to be in the first meeting he and I have ever been at in which I have a tie on and he does not. This is just planned. I was hoping it would turn out this way. So I wrote something which I'll read. Dr. Dave was always a calming presence in faculty meetings, doing his level best to keep everything from going off the rails. For no fault of his own, he did not always succeed. He always brought cookies, demure in their Tupperware tub, perhaps to keep the departmental blood sugar level above the hangry mark, and he took copious notes on his laptop. Sometimes I wondered if he was assembling a secret archive of some of the most antic behavior ever known in academic life, though he often volunteered his notes as minutes. He had also perhaps found a way to stay busy and shielded from the potential blow-ups. Post-war campus novels are typically set in English departments, but there were times in our department's history that could rival any campus novel for crazed and tragicomic material. I'm not sure I want to be around on Judgment Day when the Book of Life is opened and Dr. Dave's notes are finally spoken from the rooftops. One likes to fantasize that in writing them, he let loose a bit and left a running sarcastic commentary on the cast of characters, an array of tortured speech acts. But no doubt it is all decorous and all bile is repressed. If Dr. Dave's notes were copious, so were his book collections. This has already come up in the chat. His office could sometimes seem like a maze with labyrinthine passageways between horizontally stacked books, plus a lot of library books on the shelves. He worked and perhaps even lived a bit in his office, though he did hire my son Daniel a time or two to help haul books to and from his house on Samoa Drive. So one senses that the book collections in Becker were only the tip of the iceberg. He had the generous habit of leaving his door open during the day, watchfully raising his eyes to passersby, but he shut the door at night. If you came by Becker at night, you could see his office lights glowing from outside. I always felt bad during the day when I'd walk by and discover I'd interrupted a meal, but he'd always look up politely over his laptop. His interest in rhetoric comes, one suspects, from deeply personal wells. Dr. Dave is a deeply honest man of great integrity, but he's also a slightly cagey figure. There are some things about him that nobody knows. Maybe this is true of all of us, but he has some rarely fathomed depths. He is a man of principle, holding to what one expects are a brand of politics that hardly exist anymore in their spanning of conservative and liberal or conservatively liberal tendencies. I admire the Princeton classiness, the tie, the formality, the genteel approach. Though fascinated by argument and constitutionally reasonable, he, like me, is deeply averse to quarrels. We identified in our common state as being poorly armed against some of the less well-behaved Machiavellians around us. When I was department chair, I could always rely on him for any mop-up task and ask him to serve on an ad hoc committee or two to deal with an impossible situation or two, whose details I will disclose when his laptop notes are fully made public. That is, never. He was a glutton for punishment in departmental service, serving many times as director of undergraduate studies and anchoring the big lecture class Theory and Practice of Argument, TPA. He is the embodiment of a critical servant. Rhetoric can be raunchy and slimy, but it can also be dignified and discreet. Its available means of persuasion can range from a Twitter account to cookies in a Tupperware tub. If you don't believe there can be such a thing as noble rhetoric or want to know what it looks like, please look to the person of Dr. David B. Hinksman. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, John. Don't worry, those notes will never be released.
Did you want to say something, Tom? You have to unmute. All right.
I wanted to say applause and how it's remarkable being a colleague from afar. I know the same Hinksman. So I applaud your eloquence in expressing to David. Thanks. Thanks for us who have been his colleagues and his friends and stood with him while he watched the watch over the years.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it was nice to hear about how Dave was received by the department and how he was perceived. So thank you. Because we have our understanding of Dave and we know sometimes Dave maybe wore a different mask someplace else. So it was nice to hear. Our next speaker will be Carrie Stamp.
And speaking of wearing a mask, Chester, you are really in Georgia, right? Okay. So Bellis, I kind of took this literally as a bit of a roast for Dave.
I think you can roast him.
If my comments offend anybody, you just got to realize it's just me. I'm highly skilled at offending people, so don't take it personally. Dave, it's really hard to believe that you're retired because that must make Mike Lennon feel really old. Try to be gentle. But all of us know that you really didn't have much success before you got to Iowa City. You went to some government school. How'd that work out for you, Hinksman? Not even one day in government. Even Slappy, with his record, had far more government success than you. When that didn't work, you went to law school at the only school that would take you. Then off to the lawyer factory in New York City, where you realized the world was too hard and you didn't like sleeping on the office couch. So what next? Academia. You continued your venture as a professional student by almost getting a PhD at a Chicago PhD factory. Eventually, we got to stop calling you ABD, Hinksman, but you took your time. Now you're just an OCD PhD. If that wasn't enough, the best job you could get right out was some small Baptist college in Texas. Sure, you had a little success, but then after a few years there, you heard about the transfer. I know that Slappy must have had some blackmail material on you, and despite what Dr. Peters just said, he said that there are some things nobody knows about you, Dave. Slappy left me his notes. I won't share them with the group unless they PM me. So you knew you had to come to Iowa. You hopped on the first bus from Waco and arrived in Iowa City, and you must have really felt like you'd arrived. But it was uphill for you from there. Think of all the newspapers you were able to buy, all the coffee you were able to drink, and the bagels you were able to eat at Brugger's, and the awesome Iowa City weather. Yes, this was truly life in heaven. I remember how much fun it was to mess with you, Dave. Sean and I would come up with tricks like intentionally leaving documents in our room after our rounds. You never failed to go to the room and check to see what was left behind. I think we might even occasionally have misplaced a few of your newspapers accidentally, or some of the other periodicals, all in good fun. I know I've made some fun at your expense, Dave, but now I have to tell the truth. A lot of us younger folks on this call, we really went to Iowa because we realized that you couldn't judge us in college if you were our coach, and we didn't really have time for those decision rationales. There was something a bit amiss about the people that were attracted to Ed Craig Baird Debate Forum. I mean, come on, man. What could possibly go wrong when you traveled cross country with Racy or Coco, or God forbid, both? Aside from the crap I just said, Dave, I have to say you made me a better person. A mature thinker. You opened my eyes to the world. You honestly sometimes even put me in my place when I needed it. And you were very influential in the success that I had in life. Thanks to you, Dave, I'm now fat and rich. I hope you move someplace nice like Florida, sit on the beach, read the paper, drink coffee, and take it easy. Dave, you've earned it. For the guys and gals that were in Iowa City when you arrived, like Lennon, Wells, Sean Shearer, and myself, we all came to love and respect you. Thank you, Dave, for the impact that you had on our life. Now, the rest of you on this call, please donate to Iowa Debate. We have a generous donor who will match the first $125,000 that we're able to raise, and another donor that will match the next $10,000 we can raise in the next 72 hours. That's $3 for every dollar that you donate goes to Iowa Debate in the next 72 hours. Send Bellis an email. You got 2 matches. Thank you all. And Dave, thank you for being the man that you are.
Thanks, Carrie. And thank you for all the work you've been doing for fundraising for the program. It's really appreciated. I will join you down in Key West, as I saw in your most recent Facebook posting. So don't be surprised.
I'm back up in Trump country now in Jupiter, Dave.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
There's no Trump flotilla today.
My parents used to live in Boca, so I know what it's like up there. This is a good time of year now that hurricane season is just about over, but make sure you're boarded up before Hurricane Eta arrives.
Come on down. We got plenty of room.
Great.
And hurricane parties are awesome.
So I used to judge Kerry when he was in high school, and he has the same attitude that he had back then today. And so it was wonderful to listen to you speak. I used to remember you used to just mercilessly mock your opponents in debates, and I used to give you speaker points like they were going like it was candy. So
I'm nicer.
It's wonderful. I give you a 30 for that one, right? And a rank of 1. So that was outstanding. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Nico Polakis. Nico is the senior lecturer at the Harrington School of Communication and Media at the University of Rhode Island. Nico is also, I believe when Dave got here, it would be Dave's very first national title, if I remember. Nico and Dwight won Dissertica, if I remember correctly, right? And so, again, another person I used to judge when they're in high school. So I really feel old with all these people around, Dave. So I'm about ready to join you in retirement. So Nico, if you'd like to share, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dave. Hey there. Great to see you. I will keep my remarks within the time limits, hopefully. And I'm going to throw it back a little bit and get into the kind of the headspace of being a debater way back in the day with Dr. Dave around, okay? And let me just give you 3 snapshots of what I remember for Dr. Dave, organized not too well because they're just scribbled on my notes, old school style on a yellow piece of paper. Come on, people, you're being way too professional here and making me look terrible. I'm doing this how Dr. Dave trained me, which is to just be in my head, do a lot of research, think about a ton of shit, but still be remarkably immature when it comes to actually preparing and working and getting your notes in order. So Dr. Dave, I have thought a lot about this. I think about you a lot from time to time. Let me just give you the 3 snapshots around these 3 ideas. Mind, body, and spirit. This is how I remember Dr. Dave, through these 3 things, mind, body, and spirit. One, in terms of Dr. Dave's mind, I don't know who the smartest person in the world is or the sharpest mind, but I do know that I think Dr. Dave would be excellent at making that call for some reason. Remarkable judge of all things. And I remember vividly when there was a crazy job candidate person who came to speak at the University of Iowa. Everyone seemed totally nonplussed by this person who gave an interpersonal communication reading of chef shows on television. Did not go over well. The room was not impressed. Dr. Dave asked one question and just destroyed this person. He didn't intend to destroy this person, but he asked one simple question. And he said, you know, this is very interesting what you're saying. I'm wondering how you think it fits in with our department. We would describe a lot of the work that we do here as critical. What do you say about your work that is critical? And it was so honest, so genuine, so insightful, and so condemning, all at the same time. It was beautiful, Dr. Dave. I mean, it was smart, it was elegant, but it was genuine. That kind of insight and mind, that honest rhetorical approach, I fucking miss that. That's great. All right, so kudos to you. Second, in terms of body, it's a weird category, but there's one small detail that just strikes me as such a moment when I think about Dr. Hinksman, which is I was fortunate to go on some random debate tournament, the 100th anniversary of the International Parliamentary Debate. Never mind you, I had no idea what parliamentary debate was. It was crazy. It was up in Bates, Maine. There was like Lou Nguyen's old ex-girlfriend and her friend Nacho looking for me and waking people up. I wasn't there yet, and everyone was pissed at me before I arrived. It was weird. Okay, but it was a good time. We got sleeping quarters that was just a room with 2 sleeping bags. There was nothing for Dr. Dave. He rolled up a sweater and slept on a futon. And that, in my mind, is indicative of what this person is willing to do for debaters and other human beings. Just like I remember crazy Bill Shanahan running around pretending he's Nietzsche with a water cooler and no shoes, saying things like, you know, I would give up a Grateful Dead concert on a Chinese New Year for these kids. But when I think of Dr. Dave and his life and what he's done for debate, I think of him already having done that. And then lastly, in terms of spirit, Dr. Dave, you have to know that I'm sincere when I say that I think about you, as I did like a couple weeks ago, because I was running to class because for some crazy reason, I'm the idiot who signed up to still do some face-to-face classes and hybrid and some online. And I'm running around with a bag, and then I don't have enough room to put all of these extra folders that I have. So I got this canvas bag and I'm stuffing like water bottles and like extra folders. And I'm running to class and I'm saying to myself, Nico, what the fuck are you doing? Like, look at yourself. Who are you? And I answer that question honestly, Dr. Dave, and I say, I'm Dr. Hinksman. That's who I am, running around with all of these extra papers and folders and canvas bags because I care about my students that deeply. And I totally get that from you. And I am incredibly pleased every time I have that sensation of what am I doing? Oh, I'm kind of trying to be like Dr. Dave. It's a very fulfilling moment. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Nico. I'm willing to take the blame.
Blame or credit.
It's always the most flattering form of, compliment, to mimic him. That was wonderful, Nico. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Monty Johnson. Monty is the professor of philosophy at the University of California, San Diego. Monty, I think, came from the furthest away to join the Iowa debate program. And so I was always interested in what brought him there, from the kid that used to run legalize LSD as his affirmative to I'm going to come to a cornfield. So I'm very interested to hear what Monty has to share. Monty?
Thank you so much for organizing this, Paul. This is wonderful, and I'm so crestfallen not to have been able, that we couldn't meet in person, and I can't wait to do it next year. I'll definitely be there as soon as you put it together, and it's just really moving to see so many of my former teammates and friends and heroes really here, including Professor Goodnight. It's an honor to have you here, and Dave has always made it clear to all of his students how much he admires you, and so it's really outstanding to see you and see you all. And you were asking about how a guy who was in Seattle in the early 90s ends up in Iowa City, and it has to do with Paul. Well, first of all, it has to do with my high school coach, Bob Gilmore, who Dave coached at Baylor in the 1980s, telling me all these stories about Dave Hinksman and describing him as a walking encyclopedia. And after that, we had so many examples of that all the time. And I can remember we would try to try to come up with something Dave didn't know, like say, Dave, LNG, and he'd go, liquefied natural gas. It causes disasters in the third world, but it's critical to a transition to post-fossil fuel economies or whatever, and could just go on either a short answer or a long answer, whichever one you wanted, and you could never come up with something he hadn't read. And so he got me thinking about this, and Paul, recruited me for basically the opportunity to come work with Dave and learn from Dave. And I'd also been at the Dartmouth debate workshop and in Bill Shanahan's labs, and he was sort of a huge debate influence on me at that point, and still, and in a way, Dave is kind of like the anti-Bill, with a totally different methodology of research and debate and everything, but it's a brilliant compliment. But Dave coached me with John Brody, Jeff Keeter, and Tiffany Earle when I debated there in the early 90s. He helped us invent arguments like on the trade topic, objectivism, which I now realize is a completely immoral and asinine argument, but we used it to crush a lot of great teams arguing about nuclear war, and we'd say it doesn't matter if it doesn't conform to Ayn Rand's philosophy, it's irrelevant. Or when we're arguing critical legal studies stuff on the privacy topic with Jeff, Dave would tell us about, he was there at Harvard when these arguments were invented, and he would tell us about the authors of the articles. When I was debating with Tiffany Earle, the topic was the very salient topic of presidential powers. And I remember we used to just regularly go with Dave, Tiffany, and I to the current periodicals room of the main library and go from A to Z and find every single article relevant to the topic and photocopy it and study it. And this brings me to the main thing that I want to thank Dave for, which is really teaching me how to research, how to build an archive and a library, which kinds of things you want to acquire in hard copy and keep for continual reference, how to follow up references so that you can find the strongest argument on each side and on every issue until you reach a kind of self-referential chain so that you've got all the arguments covered, how to differentiate sort of scientific, legal, and popular sources and have a ready set of tropes to undermine any of them. I mean, all of these, this kind of wisdom that I learned from Dave, I treasure more than anything else I've learned. It's been the key to learning everything else that I've learned. And it's critical to everything I've done since then, to my my day job as a professor of philosophy. And this is what, more than any particular topic or anything, I would want to teach my students. If I could convey that spirit of inquiry and research and those kind of methods and how to do it, then I would consider myself successful and worthy of calling myself a pupil of Dr. Dave. And so, for that, I want to say thank you and congratulations on your retirement. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you, Monty. We have a lot of distinguished scholars in this group tonight, but I wish I could tell you just how distinguished Monty Johnson is, particularly as a scholar of Aristotle. Some of you know that I've been working on a project to try to trace the practices, history of argument, practical history, I guess you could say. And about a year ago, I think, or has it been two, Monty came back to Iowa City and then very generously sent me a copy of one of his books on Aristotle. So I'm really, really glad that I helped to produce a far better scholar than I am out of an activity that people sometimes accuse of being anti-intellectual. So kudos to Monty and Mike Jensen and a lot of other people, Corey, Rayburn Young, and I'm not going to catch all the people. And I also wanted to second what people said about Tom Goodnight and his influence. Without him, I would have no scholarship whatsoever. And so thank you, Tom.
Hey, Dave, question for you. For those of us that are not distinguished scholars, okay?
We're just fat, rich old guys.
Yeah. Are
Okay.
we talking about like
I have respect for
regular
Wall Street,
Aristotle, like Greek Aristotle or Aristotle Onassis?
Greek Aristotle.
All right.
Uh,
I knew Monty was going.
One of Monty's,
They're both Greek.
one of his
I was
accomplishments.
gonna say,
Right.
they're both
How
Greek.
can you
They're just
distinguish?
2,000 years separated.
Monty reconstructed one of Aristotle's dialogues in praise of philosophy. And that piece of work is cited everywhere. I mean, it is monumental. Right, Monty?
Thank you so much, Dave. And I can't accept all of those compliments, but it's, and the thing is it's interesting because I never actually took a class from you. You were just my debate coach that entire time. But, coming to you for advice, academic advice, how does this work, and so forth, not to mention just letters of recommendation and so forth that you wrote on my behalf. But it's changed my life, made me who I am, and I just can't wait to see you in person again and see everybody else. So thanks again to Paul for organizing it, and I would really love to hang out with Coco and Chuck and Nico and everyone else again, and see Carrie and everyone. So let's do this for sure. And thanks if those donors to the program are those anonymous people or whatever are here. That's important, and thanks for that.
And we're even taking donations from you scholars, whatever you want to give.
I think Monty hit on something that is one, I think, of the most important lessons I learned, and that's the maturation of my thought, being tutored by Dave, even as a young adult and a young professional. The movement in which my mind developed and the expanse of which I now discern and understand truth. And, in today's society, to do the work to discover truth within the flood of information we have becomes much more difficult, requires much more work. And Dave really armed, I think, all of us with the ability to do that work and to learn our own place in this world. Our next speaker will be Eric Epping. Eric is an MD, PhD from the University of Iowa. He's a clinical associate professor, Department of Psychiatry, the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine here at the University of Iowa. And one of the things that's interesting is I used to judge him during high school, but then he and his wife moved in across the street from me when I purchased kind of my first home here in Iowa City.
Ours
And
too.
so, yeah. And so as he was, and I think in his residency at that time, it was nice to have a very familiar and friendly face across the street. And so, Eric, thank you so much for volunteering. And
thank you, Paul, for organizing this. And yeah, I look forward to seeing Dave and everyone else in person soon. And it's great to see so many people from our past and at Iowa debate. It's a tough act to follow Monty Johnson, but I'll do my best. Although I'd like to say that maybe I don't know if I had anything to do with Monty coming to Iowa. I know we first met at the Dartmouth Institute when we were in high school, and so we were in the same class at Iowa as well. And although I met Monty before coming to Iowa for debate, I actually also met you, Dave. You probably don't remember I think the first time we met was probably when you were at the Iowa caucus debate tournament at Cedar Rapids, Washington. I think you ran the tab room, and I remember helping you out at that. And I think that was my first experience with Dave. And what I remember from that is that you were quite the taskmaster with making sure everything got done, which was showed that it is important to keep things going and be well organized. And of course that expanded into other things with our future experiences. And so then eventually ended up at Iowa 30 years ago, hard to believe. But even though my time in the debate program wasn't very long before I moved over into pursuing medicine, I still remember many things. I know some people have put in the chat as well about being at the International Center and meeting in the moot courtroom, late nights with Carl, the custodian, I believe. Yeah, I remember him too. And I also, for Dave, I remember that you spent time working with me directly to help construct arguments and try to make me into a better debater. And very grateful for that. And I also remember watching Doctor Who as well. I don't know if you're still a fan, but good to hear. That's great. Well, I know even though I wasn't in the program for very long, only a year. I did stay in Iowa City subsequently. And one great thing, of course, as Paul mentioned, being neighbors with Paul for a few years, but it's always great to see Dave in Iowa City and to run into you and to catch up and hear about how things are doing with the debate program and all the great success that you've had over the years. And I know it's not been possible to run into you at the Java House or Brugger's the last few months, but hopefully we can do that again sometime soon. And so thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I was always afraid that you were going to psychoanalyze me after you got your degree, so I appreciate your kindness.
I'll save that for later.
Yeah, you and Carrie can get together and work on that.
Cheshire, you're up. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. David Cheshire, the Director of Academic Programs, Creative Media Industries Institute of Georgia State University. I think Cheshire and Hinksman go way back. And I can't imagine the different stories that Dave has to share. But Cheshire, I'm really interested in listening to you. So remember, this is a recording. So
okay. Thank you, Paul, for organizing this for sure. You said I had 30 minutes. Is that right?
No, we just gave that to Steve.
Okay. I'm also on the call tonight from Joe Biden country, which is to say Atlanta, Georgia. So along with Mike Janis and Heidi Hamilton and others, I was a debate assistant at Iowa while I was completing my doctoral studies, which gave me a terrific chance to work with David and Paul Slappy and Paul Bellis and many of you. Since graduating back in 1996, I've been at Georgia State University, and that's given me the chance to stay in close contact with David since leaving Iowa City. I must say it is a true privilege to have the chance to say thanks for the impact David Hinksman has had on my personal and my professional life. For one, maybe a simple thing, I wouldn't have finished my dissertation except for David's generosity, because I literally wrote my dissertation on David's kitchen table. He let me stay there in the bridge summer between Iowa and my first faculty job. And of course, looking back on it, what I remember most was just the simple graciousness of it. David offered his place easily, generously. He didn't give me a hard time about it. And I actually finished my dissertation, which was a miracle. I didn't actually get to know David all that well until I arrived at Iowa. I debated as an undergrad at Wake Forest University, and for part of the time I was there, David was associated with the Kentucky program and crazy J.W. Patterson. So I was occasionally judged by David. I remember that my main coach at Wake Forest, Ross Smith, and I argued about whether to strike Hinksman. Now, of course, I wanted him. Actually, I mean that, I did. I always admired him as a judge. David's long been regarded as one of the nation's best debate judges. Actually, those of you who've had that experience know that David has what's actually a singular skill at being able to hone in on the key turning point in a debate. It was, as a debater, I found that to be educationally wonderful, because I always came away with a very clear sense of exactly how he saw things and what was working and what wasn't working. So I was grateful for that. But here's the thing, Ross Smith liked David's judging too. David judged a lot of Wake Forest debaters over the years, but, and you'll love this, Ross put it to me this way, and of course I was a 19-year-old undergrad at the time. We need to strike him because, he said, David Hinksman is too smart to fall for your bullshit. That was what he said. That pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Right there. That's Hinksman. My Iowa years flew by. It was such a blast to be there during those years. The doctoral program was intellectually alive. Being associated with the college debaters and the summer programs, it was just exhilarating. I, to this day, have such fond memories of hanging out with Coco and Smith and Sandler and Rayburn and Polakis and Epping and Jensen and, gosh, Sean Shearer, Tiffany Earle, Keeter, Ernie Wagner, Monty Johnson, and even Michael Antonucci, of all people. So look, I know time is short and I need to wrap up, but just a couple last things. One is to say that David's retirement makes me nostalgic, actually. It's simply hard for me to get my head around the idea of a world where there's an A. Craig Baird debate program or an Iowa Com Studies program without David Hinksman in the heart of it. So many of the mentors we had there were gone and too soon. Paul Slappy, of course, what an amazing, hilarious, complicated, passionate, inspirational character he was. Just one block from where I'm sitting, there's a coffee shop and the owner smokes those noxious clove cigarettes. And every single time I detect that smell, it instantly takes me back to Iowa City. Others who were so influential in the department's life of the mind have now passed on too soon as well. Bruce Gronbeck and Donovan Oakes and Michael McGee and Sam Becker most of all. But for me and for the other grad students who worked with debate, David has always had such a positive intellectual influence. For one, it always seemed to me like he'd read everything. His enormous library was always there to confirm it if you had any doubt. And in the vital but also rather polarized world of contest debating in 2020, everyone I know looks up to David as an intellectual force in the world of debate. And then one last thing I promise, I just want simply to take a moment to note that for 40 years, David Hinksman has worked at an astonishingly high level of energy and workaholism. Tens of thousands of students have taken his classes or heard him lecture. Thousands of debaters coached or judged or mentored. not to mention what only probably feels like the thousands of hours of faculty and committee meetings. But this is simply an extraordinary and a sustained contribution. It will be missed forever, and no one has better earned the pleasures of retirement. So I thank you for everything, truly.
Thank you, David. Your eloquence makes me blush as usual. One thing that you should remind people about is that dissertation that you dashed off, thanks to Michael McGee's willingness to write on your behalf, was an award-winning dissertation at the National Communication Association.
Yeah,
so
shockingly.
And the things you've accomplished since you've arrived at Georgia State are also amazing, and people should Google you and find out what all those things are.
Thanks.
There haven't been any misspellings lately, though, have there, David?
No, always.
Slappy beat that out of me like there's no tomorrow. What does it mean to be an editor?
The history of the Iowa debate program would have been impossible to sustain without David Cheshire's effort at reformatting and typing an MA thesis that was written under the direction of A. Craig Baird.
And transcribing all those notes.
And it justified all the times that Slappy screamed at you that got done. And I'm sure wherever he is right now, he's smiling and looking kindly upon you.
It's true.
Ellis, I have an announcement.
Absolutely.
So I posted in the chat that I got a $3,000 contribution from one of our alums tonight. Thank you very much to that person. But I also just got a match to the $10,000 match that now will match everybody's contributions, $3 for every dollar that you contribute. So we have another $10,000 from a donor tonight, and every buck you contribute, you got 1 match, 2 matches, and 3 matches. And if your company has a matching program, they'll probably match it as well, which means you can get 6 for 1. This is easy money, folks. Contribute to the A. Craig Baird Debate Forum, please. I do this professionally.
Thanks, Gary.
Our very last speaker tonight in the formal program will be Mike Lennon. And I wanted to reserve this spot of honor for Mike, because Mike was Dave's kind of very first debater, senior at that time, I believe, right, Mike?
Correct.
When Dave arrived. And so he was kind of Dave's very first senior debater here at the University of Iowa. And so whatever time you need, Mike, you can go ahead and talk.
Well, thank you. I'm going to be brief because I think everyone wants to socialize. But let me first start out with a shout out to Libby Slappy, because Paul came the year before Dave came, and it was Paul's vision for how to continue on the legacy of Steve and Bruce and others and build this program. And I'm grateful for his efforts and the fact that I was able to be part of it. Dave, my first encounter with you, you got it completely wrong. And I now know why. Because Cheshire said you always voted for Wake Forest. So in a 4-3 break round at Navi Nats, you voted for Gloria Cabada over Mike Lennon. I was crushed.
Top speaker at the NDT.
You know, it's a debatable proposition. I just want to share a couple of cute stories with you about Dave and be a good steward of your time. The first one is when I really first started working with Dave as an Iowa debater. The topic my year in 1987-88 was NATO. We should significantly reduce our contribution to NATO. And I'd found some pretty interesting research about how if the US drew down significantly its support for NATO, there could be a surprise Russian attack. I was very stoked about this. And this is in the summer, classes haven't even started. I've already, back in those days, we used to photocopy the articles or the books and cut them out and write the source. And I took the dissad to Dave. And he looked at it and he said, "Really? Surprise attacked?" I had misspelled surprise. I had left out the R before the P. And he razzed me for the next hour about how I had misspelled surprise. But then he guided me to breaking in the break rounds at probably the hardest tournament of the year, the heart. And so in accomplishing that, the KU team thought it would be very funny because we were better days because Dave had jumped from Baylor to Iowa and Robin had jumped from Baylor to KU. And so we were better days, D-A-Y-S. My partner, Steve Wells, and I were days. So when we broke, they decided to be funny about it and call us Iowa Daze, D-A-Z-E. Oh, I was so infuriated. But I would never have gotten there if it weren't for the hard work of Dr. Dave and that whole Iowa team that year. We supported each other, and Carrie and Sean had a lot of success. My second funny story about Dave is also early in his tenure. Of course, I was only there early in his tenure, but he was going off somewhere, traveling, headed to the Cedar Rapids airport because, of course, Iowa City has no airport. And he called the debate room in a panic. And he was like, "I'm not sure I turned off my coffee pot. Can you go to my condo and check my coffee pot?" Of course I did. He told me where the secret key location was, and I went in, and sure enough, the coffee pot was off. There was no issue whatsoever with the coffee pot. Let me just finish on this note. And thank you, Dave, for having the faith in me to continue to work with the program and coach those that came after me, Sean and Carrie and Randy Sandler and Guevara. And I'm sure Guevara hates me at this point because we did a couple of practice debates in which we did stop and goes, and I must have stopped him 25 times before he even spoke 5 minutes. He was really red in the face. But I think he would say it made him better. And Dave, it's because of the work that you did with me and your faith in me to be able to work with those debaters that I'm grateful for.
Thanks, Mike. I'm not sure where Omar is right now, but I know that every time I see him, whether it's at a debate tournament or professional conference, he mentions how important it was for him that he had people like you helping him out.
Thank you for sharing that.
It's absolutely true. Mike is one of our distinguished attorney alums, and he's spent time in London as well as Houston, and there's a lot of ex-debaters in Houston, and fortunately, a number of them have been involved in Urban Debate League activities in Houston, and to me, that's one of the most important things that's happened in interscholastic debate over the last 30 years. And we would never have had some of the fine debaters like Brooke Kimbrough without it.
Well, one of them is on the phone or on the Zoom tonight, Dave. Nathan Coco is very active in the Urban Debate League here in Houston.
Excellent. And there's another Coco Christofferson, and she's waving right now. She was a happy addition to our squad towards the end of my time at Iowa as a debate coach, and really glad that she joined us. And we had some wonderful Mexican food at the Northwestern Debate Tournament while we were waiting for the elims to end.